Our next speaker has set up the applied AI initiative UnternehmerTUM. It's one of the largest European initiatives in applied sciences. He holds a PhD at the Entrepreneur Research Institute at the Technical University of Munich, and he has a background working for McKinsey. Today, he's the managing director at UnternehmerTUM. Please welcome Andreas Liebl. Yes, thank you for your applause.
Yeah, so thanks for having me here now at the day for applied AI, and I'm speaking here today for the applied AI initiative, and just want to give you a bit of an overview about how we are thinking about scaling AI, because that's ultimately what counts. We need to get AI into application. Yesterday we heard a bit about the paper tigers in Germany. We tend to talk about things, but it's really about getting it into application. So what are we doing? So our mission as Applied AI, as a kind of a non-profit organization, is to help the whole country to get to an AI age by accelerating the journey to a AI maturity. And the question is, what is this? I will talk a bit about this in a couple of minutes, but that's actually our goal, to really help a whole country, the whole industry, to get to that level. And we do that by two different things. On the one hand, we work on a kind of a platform model, so we try to help as many companies as possible. And we just heard Rasmus with Merantix on kind of building AI-first startups. What we're trying to do with a kind of a second part is to work with the companies that tend or intend to become kind of AI-first companies, to help them to go there, to really work on the core innovation topics of companies, to become AI-first companies. And if we look at AI and kind of the AI journey of how you actually apply AI, it's first of all really important that we consider the application of AI not as just one large thing that happens, but actually there are also maturity levels. You start, we heard about this from Christian this morning, you start with doing experiments, you start with doing POCs, and that's actually the first stage. So you get to know this technology, but you actually tend to get stuck at that level. It's not easy to get from this POC to the next level. Next level is practitioner. Practitioner meaning really applying AI into the first 2 to 3 applications, really getting to understand what AI means for you. And the third stage is then really professionalizing this. Because at the second one, it's really hard. It's really a lot of effort you need to put in. It's less replicable. So it's not really efficient, and you won't get much value out of this. So the third one is really about getting value out of what you're doing with AI, scaling it globally within your organization. And then there's a fourth pillar, which is the shaper. And shaper is really meaning you change the way your industry thinks. You build new business models. You really, you really become an AI-first company. So, and if you look at the numbers that are here, most of the companies in Germany, and you have various surveys on that from Bitkom, from others, you actually, many of the companies here in Germany are at this, not even started with AI, or at this experimental level, while there are very few companies here really on the shaper level. There are a couple of startups there, but really on the majority of our industry, we are very much in the beginning. And that's the issue, because also from a political side, from a government side, what we're doing in our AI strategy is helping to get companies used to AI, to get them up to speed. So that's really focusing on this not started and experimental levels of what we're doing also from a political side. But if you look at the AI strategy in Germany, in Europe, what we want to become is global leaders. We want to compete globally against China, against the US, against other countries, and we want to maintain a position where we have our hidden champions, where we really want to be AI-first companies. So we need to get there. And that's what's not happening right now. And the question is how to get from these early stages to these levels here, the professional and shaper level. So let's talk about this today. So what we are doing, and I said this, we try to help as many companies, so we try to shift the curve, right? So there are many companies at this very first levels, and our goal is to help as many as possible to become level 3 and 4. And what we do as appliedAI, we publish quite a bit. We try to develop tools that help as many companies as possible, very practical things that help companies to really become at this level 3 and 4. We do trainings. We do the mentioned Elements of AI course in Germany. We built other courses like Foundations of AI, all free courses that we offer. We have an AI lab. We do kind of assessments, conferences, tools, and so on. But now, really, let's focus today, when we talk about appliedAI, about scaling AI to get from this practitioner to the professional level. And there are quite a few studies. This is one from MIT and BCG. And just let's focus here on that lower part. And that's kind of confirming what I just said. Of the 90% of the companies that have made some investments in AI, only 40% really report business gains. And business gains meaning some gain at all. It's not really kind of drastic gains and transformative activities and really changing the business, but some gains at all. So what you can see is most of the companies actually struggle to get value out of that. And there are a couple of reasons, and we heard a little bit today, but kind of we cluster it into 3 different parts. On the one hand, we talk about data, and data is not code. And that is really, really difficult to understand for many companies because you typically tend to write code, you have software engineers, and you actually get a program out of this. Now you have data as the main source that kind of builds your model. And that means that you need to treat data in a way that it's reliable, that you can actually scale with the data. And I mean that means that you actually need to talk about reproducibility, auditability, and all these things, and that is based on data and not on code anymore. So that's kind of the first really difference from kind of traditional business, and that makes it really for companies to struggle on the AI journey. The second one is that we talk about training and not development anymore. So it's really a much more experimental approach. You have uncertainties that lies in the solution space. So you don't really know where to get and what you actually need to do to come to a specific solution, while until now, the biggest uncertainty was changing user requirements. So that changes. That's the second part. And the third one is that we go from a verification to an evaluation of the system. So we need to retrain. It's not that you do updates, that you do patches, or debugging, but it's really a completely new training if you have model drifts and all these things. So you also have to take care of what's happening in the maintenance and the long run of actually using AI, which is totally different from what has been done typically in modern software development. And that leads to something that Andrew actually put quite nicely. We learned in the internet area that if you take a shopping mall, add a website, it's not an internet company. And today it's the same thing. If you take any company and if you add deep learning, then it's not an AI company. And that gets you, if you do that, that gets you to that maybe practitioner level. You have 1 or 2 or 3 AI cases and that's it, but you will never get to a professional company or this AI first, these shaper companies. You need to rethink how you do business. So how we structure this is along a kind of a house. You need to redefine your vision, your ambition of what you want to do with AI. You need to systematically talk and think about use cases, about the whole organization, the enabling factors within the organization. Then you need to talk about execution and what you do different what I just said about this kind of code and data topics, trainings, and so on. So you need to think also about the different execution process. It's not a classical development process of what you are used to do in companies. So we take this type of structure, and this type of structure is actually valid for each of these maturity levels. And the questions in each of those maturity levels change for all of these dimensions that are on this list. So it changes for the organization. You might have different structures in different parts of the maturity, also different people. The AI technologies changes and the requirements changes, and so on. So what does this mean in practical terms? And this is one example. We just take a look at AI in production. And you might start with using a computer vision algorithm to detect errors and like parts that are, have some kind of scratches or something within your production system. So the ultimate thing, what you need in the beginning is actually the data, good parts, wrong parts. You have to find and identify a good model to train the data with, but that's all. To prove that an AI system is capable of coming to a solution to provide value is actually some data, some model, you do the training, and you have this. So that's your proof of concept. In the next phase, if you talk about applying AI in that specific case, what you need to do is to think about how to integrate this. And if you integrate this kind of solution in the whole production system, you need to have the system integration to your cloud infrastructure or your on-prem infrastructure that then collects the data from your camera. And then you have to have a process where you decide what you do with the parts, what you do with the output of the AI system. And the output could be it's a correct part and it's suspicious. It's something that might not be correct. And the question is how you split between correct and suspicious, because you always get a probability. Once you have these suspicious parts, you have maybe a manual inspection, and then this person then decides if that's still a correct part, or if maybe it's something that actually has a scratch or something on the part and just puts it out of the production process. And then you have the feedback loop to the overall system to then maybe start retraining that from time to time. And the system then gives you the recommendation for the overall process. So that implies that you talk about a process. That implies that you talk also about liability. So who is liable if that part that comes out of that is actually something that causes you to have like major recalls in like getting cars, for example, back because there's a really critical issue. That is also a question of how you deal with that, how you train these persons. So it's more about the process of implementing the AI solution in your business. And suddenly you don't talk in the kind of the strategy house here, you don't talk only about data and the AI technology, but you talk about the execution, you talk about the people that are working on that, the processes, the governance structure, and so on. That's the level 2. That's if you want to be practitioner. If you talk about professional, it's not feasible to just stay with a computer vision algorithm for one part in one plant to do quality control. But you now start to think about how can I use computer vision in my production overall, because I have it here, and maybe there are other use cases. There's maybe kind of quality control, picking and logistics, manual production processes, the supervision of the automation systems and the robots in the machine, so you can use computer vision in more parts. If you talk about this, and if you have this larger vision of how to use computer vision in your production, you then think about a data pipeline for all the pictures, for all the videos you actually get, and you talk about privacy and anonymization of data for all the recorded pictures and videos here. You talk about the correctness of the data, bias, also cybersecurity in this data pipeline. And then on top, on the model You then talk about auditability, about benchmarks. You need to know if the system is better than the one you had before. About validation, reproducibility, explainability, stability of the system, because you don't want your factory to actually have, you need to stop because your system, for example, is not stable anymore. So you somehow come from one case to talking about data pipelines, talking about infrastructures that are on top of one case, but it's applicable for many cases. And then you talk about the whole structure. And that is the real challenge, that you move away from AI as a technological question to AI as a company and organizational question. And what I can only agree to Christian was he said that AI is a CEO topic or C-level topic, because if you want to tackle AI at this professional level, you need to really think about this whole structure. And that means that it's not only a tech topic anymore. So how we deal with that, we just published today a AI journey map. You can find it online on our website, appliedAI.de. And what we did is to, first of all, classify and structure all the challenges that typically companies face to get from the first level to the fourth level in this AI maturity on the AI journey, to help you understand what's coming up. Because that's what you ultimately need to understand, is where are you at these kind of different levels, and what are the next challenges you need to tackle in order to become more professional. So that's the first step. As I said, we try to publish as much as possible. In the next phase, we further fill this out, and we then provide solutions to all of these questions, because ultimately it's about then actually helping companies to get through all the different levels to mature on this journey. But as I said, you can find this online. You can have a closer look. We did this exercise with a couple of companies, and they really liked it because it helps them to provide an agenda for next year. They don't know what to do, but if we have the structure and if you really thoroughly go through it, you actually have a roadmap of how to mature systematically. Now, talking about this, what I said about this practitioner to professional level, from our perspective, there are a couple of points that you need to consider and tackle and kind of the challenges at that specific level. The first one is you need to talk about this AI business models. You don't talk only about this classical products and processes, but you really need to rethink about what AI would mean at this larger scale if you apply it in your organization. The second one is human-centered AI. What we see in many companies is that they stop prototyping now. They tell us we have enough prototypes. Some large companies have 200, 300 prototypes, and they stop developing prototypes. They only focus on process changes, incentive system for the people, upskilling of people, to really get to the application of AI. So talk or think about the human that's behind the system that actually needs to apply AI. The third one is from single cases to use case clusters and value clusters, because ultimately there is a specific capacity in your organization of how many different topics you can handle as a core team within the organization, and you need to decide and re-evaluate what are really the core cases you need to focus on. Fourth one is getting to these data pipelines. I quickly mentioned this. And the fifth one is kind of really getting from AI projects to an industrialization framework that helps you scale AI drastically and reliably within the organizations. And these questions are not easy questions. There are no good best practices outside. There have just been a couple of books from Google being published on especially on the latter two points on the pipelines and the industrialization of how they do it, but that's kind of questions and challenges that all the companies face, and that we hopefully also as appliedAI try to tackle together to then provide it again, because ultimately we need to answer these questions to become professional users of AI technology. And I just emphasized it. AI is not something that is done by the experts, but it's something that needs to be done at a board level, because ultimately the board needs to define the ambition of what you want to do with AI. And most of the companies that we work with then also at some point struggle with sufficient understanding, with sufficient commitment on the board level. We just published this artificial intelligence for boards with more than 20 C-levels that comment on what it meant for them as a company to really start using AI. And this ambition is something that maybe is a bit underestimated. Maybe it's not visionary enough, actually. There are quite a few companies in all different sectors that really drive AI. And just due to the lack of time, just want to emphasize the first one. So please, if you don't know Ant Financial, Google them and see what they are doing. They have the goal of 0 human operations. That's one of the largest banks in China, and they really kind of challenge all the processes in banking with the goal of having a fully AI-driven bank, and it's maybe one of the most advanced companies in this sector in the world. There are quite some articles about that, but this is something what maybe is an ambition in that sector, and you have all the different other examples in all the other sectors. So, final point, what's your ambition? What's the ambition of you in your industry? Because that ultimately drives where you want to stay. Many companies want to stay at that practitioner level. That's also totally fine. If we have the ambition to stay global tech leaders in the world, to stay hidden champions, we need to think about these two categories. And that means for you as a board member, as a C-level, that you have an ambition within your company, because otherwise you won't get to that stage. So thanks. From my side, that was kind of a bit of an insight of what we're doing as appliedAI. Happy to get in touch with you, happy to follow this vision to really transform our economy in Germany and in Europe, because that's ultimately what we need to do, what we heard yesterday that is essential for us. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Andreas. We don't have questions from the audience yet, but we are very glad to take them. I have a couple of questions. I was impressed by this almost gigantic map called the journey, right? And I thought, that's a long journey. Do you think this is like encouraging to CXOs, or rather off-putting, saying, well, maybe then I don't need AI if it's that complicated?
Well, I think it's necessary and it's realistic. Right. What we did in the last couple of years in appliedAI is actually collect all these different challenges from all these companies. And if you don't, listen to talks on stage from these companies, but if you talk to them in person, they talk about these challenges and they tell you, we are at that point and we don't know how to continue. Right. It's from my perspective, it's realistic, but you've seen also the numbers. That is an explanation of why these numbers are so much on the left side of this picture. It is a challenge, and obviously, it's not easy, because otherwise all the companies would be level 3 or 4 already.
Sure, we've seen a lot of different problems. Of course, on the graphic, everything looks the same, has the same size, the same font. So, in which phase, or maybe where exactly on this map of a journey are the biggest problems, or the time where everybody thinks, oh, I'm not sure if we're going to make it as a company?
Yeah, I think, so on the one hand, it's this ambition and commitment. Right. So on the very top of this landscape, because if we heard about from Christian about this kind of play money you get to kind of experiment and so on. That's all sufficient to get to this first level, to the experimenter. But at some point, there needs to be a commitment from the company to really start transforming, to really think of AI first, or professional use of AI, and that's a different commitment that you have to take. So that's a large struggle. And then I would say on the execution side, on this industrialization framework, that's kind of our main focus also next year, because we haven't seen any working industrialization framework outside of the big digital tech players. And this is one of the key challenges now for many of larger and smaller companies in Germany, that they need to get from this 1 or 2 working use cases in the organization to scaling it, to professionalize it, to make it reliable and stable. And that, from our perspective at least, is one of the largest challenges because it affects the infrastructure on the software hardware side, the data, it affects the organization as a whole. So that is something I would say is one of the largest challenges.
Right. I also remember the slide where the proof of concept was just the first of 3 steps or 3 phases. And we were talking about the POC graveyard before. Yeah. So how do you advise people which concepts to prove at all, and to decide after you have a proof of concept if you should go forward and implement everything and roll it out?
So what we do is we actually challenge companies quite a bit on this core AI, what to do internally for themselves and what is something that they just do with partners. So, and from our perspective, 90% of the cases they should do with startups, should do with any other providers, because it's not something they should do in the long run on their own. They don't have people to do that, they don't have the expertise, and they simply don't understand this question of retraining and technical depth and what's all associated with maintaining AI systems. Our first discussion always is that really something you need to do on your own? If not, there are so many good startups, you can work with them, and it's so easy to get these kind of first prototypes running, and then also they help you to get into application. Then you get rid of most of the questions and challenges there. And then there are quite a few really essential AI applications in the company that really affect their core knowledge, and where they say, well, that's something we need to do internally.
Right.
And what we do now is to help them then mature on that, but it's kind of reducing the vast number of AI use cases to quite 2 or 3 or even 1, and then you really can focus on this one and have partners, strong partners outside of this.
Right, and you also showed the quote, I think it was a quote by Andrew, which said that having a company and adding a bit of machine learning doesn't make it an AI company, but I think the truth is also that not every company has to transform into an AI company, right?
Exactly, that's what I meant. It's totally fair to stay at the practitioner level. It's totally fair to have 1 or 2 startups you work with to do predictive maintenance.
And how do you deal with the fear that maybe it might not be enough? Like the other company across the road, if they transform themselves more, then in 20 or 50 years, we might not be on the market anymore.
I would actually be happy if that's the fear of most of the companies, because right now, many companies don't even think about, they think it's enough. They don't see that it's maybe not enough to get there. So what I'm telling them is, well, you need to think up globally about the companies that are at this level 3 and 4, and you need to get there. So I would be very happy if companies fear that what they're doing is not enough.
Right. We have one question from the audience. From the perspective of policymakers, where do you see the biggest leverage points to help companies advance through this journey?
Yeah. I only shortly mentioned this. From my perspective, what's the kind of wrong approach, missing approach now is that right now policy only really focuses on the very first levels. What I would like to have is a program that helps to scale AI with the goal of getting to this professional and shaper level. Both on the startup side, we have quite a few programs, but they all focus on tech transfer and so on. We don't have good programs to build global champions, leaders, these shaper companies on the startup side. And we don't have systematic approaches that really help and accompany companies along the journey to also stay maybe global hidden champion or actually become hidden champions. So on the both sides, if we have the ambition to stay there as Germany, as Europe, we should focus on these 2 steps, at least as a vision, and with kind of programs from also supported by the government, by the politics, to really systematically get there and don't stop at the first levels.
Thanks very much. I'm really impressed how detailed your insights were. I'm sure there's a lot more where this came from, and I hope that everybody who is interested takes a look at it. Thank you very much, Andreas Liebl.
Thank you.